One. Hi, this is Bruce Rawles. I'm speaking again with Susan Dugan, and as always, about A Course in Miracles. And today we thought we'd talk about lesson 34, which is one of the two lessons, along with Workbook Lesson 5, that Ken Wapnick recommends, that sort of metaphorically, if you're stranded on a desert island without your course book, if you could only remember two lessons, this would be one of the two to remember. And I think very aptly so, because lesson 5 is I'm never upset for the reason I think, which basically gives us the opportunity to withdraw our projections, and by seeing that we're all the same, which eliminates the harshness and the cruelty that we project out, or at least it begins to ask us if we want to question that. And then over time, we see that's pretty crazy. And that sameness then leads us to also question the internal guilt as well as the external guilt, which I think lesson 34 really kind of brings to a crescendo. I could see peace instead of this. Maybe that's possible. So anyway, thanks for the suggestion.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think lesson 5, as you were saying, is sort of the Ken in his, later in his life was emphasizing those two lessons, lesson 5 and lesson 34, as pretty much the simple way of thinking about the steps of forgiveness. And in lesson 5, I'm not upset for the reason I think, is really just, the recognition that it's the cause of, what seems to be happening is not what I think it is. And, that is, I mean, that's really just, we may not believe that, but it's that questioning, this is not the real cause of why I'm upset. This is an outside picture of an inner condition. And then, but I love lesson 34. I could see peace instead of this, because for me, sometimes just going to that is enough to, I mean, either one actually,
Yeah.
but I often, I think I often have the thought when I'm having an ego attack, which is a lot of the time, I mean, it seems as if the world is constantly interfering with our peace. Every single plan that we make seems to be, thrown into chaos by others or by circumstances or by things that come up in my dream. And I mean, you can't really get through, unless you're like completely in isolation. And even then, because you can't get through peaceful times because your thoughts are constantly generating problems for you. So, or you're tripping over something, or your computer's, a problem, or your body's a problem. So there always seems to be a problem. And I know for me, one of my big ones is the belief that, that I can't find peace. I can't, because there's all this noise, there's all this chaos, there's all these demands, there's all these interruptions, all these interferences. And so I love just this simplicity of this, of seeing that, I could see peace instead of this, reminds me that nothing outside me really has the power to take my peace away. And unless I let it. And so it allows me to look at how I let it, that there's a part of me that wants to be in chaos, that there's a part of me that is terrified of peace, the peace of God, the peace of, the quiet center of our mind. And so as much as I externally, and as in verbally and in my thoughts, believe that Susan wants peace, the truth of my dream speaks otherwise, because I let everything get to me. And so this is a lesson, I think, that for all of us who are not at the, we're not, the course is not geared toward people who are about to wake up or are, have no guilt in their mind. It's geared toward those of us who are deeply asleep, and those of us who are really, taking the dream very, very seriously. And so it's really, it's calling to us from outside the dream, but it's meeting us where we are, which seems mired in a chaotic world, a chaotic relationships, chaotic life. And so, it's very gentle in that it doesn't ask us not to judge. It doesn't ask us to not to be what we are experiencing, but it does ask us to question, and it does ask us to look at what we're doing. And this is a great lesson that gets us to look at, there's a part of me that really doesn't want peace, and there's a part of me that is always at peace, that always sees only peace and knows that nothing outside me can take my peace away. And so, I can make another choice when I'm ready. Maybe I'm too afraid right now, and I'm too mired in it, but at least I can have that thought, that reminder that I could see peace instead of this, and that I I want to see peace instead of this when my fear subsides. That my overall goal, that my purpose is to begin choosing the inner teacher of peace over the ego, the inner teacher of selfishness and chaos and destruction, and the belief that we're separate from each other, and that's a guilty, that we really, it had terrible consequences, and somebody has to pay, which is what we're always thinking. And which is why we want to blame the fact that we're not peaceful on everybody and thing around us, because we don't want to take responsibility for the choice that we're making right now to keep that silly game going, you know. So the game of guilt going. So
And it's a pretty, like you say, a pretty 24/7 constant game, and thus we
yeah, it is.
actively question it, not in any kind of confrontational, demanding, warlike way, but just or oppositional way. Just
Yeah,
what if this isn't true?
right,
What if this ego propaganda from
right,
this inner tyrant is just all bluff? Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. And that again, that's sort of, it's not as it seems. I'm not upset. Lesson 5, I'm not upset for the reason I think.
Mm.
This is not really what this is about. It's really not about the circumstances or the other person or the interruption or any of that. It's about my fear of um of returning to the peace of God, my fear of joining with that wholeness, and my continuing desire to play the game of specialness, play the game, try to make this experiment in individuality somehow work out, even though um, it's becoming clearer and clearer that there's no way to make it work. That it's just, that it's a dream of suffering. So, and chaos, as we were saying. So, yeah. So we can just read through it, or
Sure, sure. I
maybe,
think
yeah.
there's plenty in it, even though it's not one of the
It's
longer
simple,
lessons.
but there's a
Yeah,
lot to
there
it.
really
Yeah.
is a lot to it. Yeah.
Yep. So,
Shall I read the first paragraph?
sure.
Okay. Lesson 34 is I could see peace instead of this. I just the word this to me is such an open-ended um, word, because it really could be replaced by any specific
Yep.
that
It
we
covers
seem to be
anything.
troubled by. Yeah.
Right. Anything that we're attributing our loss of peace to.
Hmm.
Right. Yep.
Anything that appears to threaten our tranquility of mind.
Yep.
Okay, so paragraph 1 begins, the idea for today begins to describe the conditions that prevail in the other way of seeing. Peace of mind is clearly an internal matter. It must begin with your own thoughts and then extend outward. It is from your peace of mind that a peaceful perception of the world arises. Now we're talking cause and effect again, huh?
Right. Yep.
And the ego's cause is always chaos, which then projects out into a fearful, sinful, guilty, upsetting world, because that was the setup. And the Holy
Right.
Spirit's thought system is always one that says, what if that's not what if that's not true? What if that dualistic dueling dream of warlike oppositional uh, made up stuff is really just that, made up, and therefore forgivable.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and it must begin with peace must begin with your own thoughts and then extend outward. I mean, and conversely, um, chaos must begin with my own thoughts too, right? It's a choice. It's an outside picture of a choice that I already made. I already became afraid, and so I reached for the interpretation that the event or the situation or the person or whatever I'm attributing it to is the problem. I projected onto that, but it's really a choice that I'm making in the mind when the guilt rises up and I become fearful again of love and fearful of joining with love, returning to love, and so I have to keep that choice going, and I choose to be, the less guilty one by experiencing myself as a victim in some way, right? So, yeah. Okay, should we read on?
Sure.
3 longer practice periods are required for today's exercises. One in the morning and one in the evening are advised, with an additional one to be undertaken at any time in between that seems most conducive to readiness. All applications should be done with your eyes closed. It is your inner world to which the applications of today's idea should be made. And, the workbook is our introduction to practicing this and beginning to examine our less than peaceful thoughts, our judgmental thoughts, our hateful thoughts, our angry thoughts, our defensive thoughts, our worried um, and anxious thoughts, and all of that. But as the workbook is that 1 year training program and just introducing us to this practice. But this is a practice that, as course students, who are making, to become a teacher of God, the manual says you have to at least complete the workbook, right? And so, and then the journey really begins. Then it begins of trying to live this, trying to practice this throughout your day, and changing the purpose of our lives from a prison to a classroom by really beginning to pay attention to all of those judgments, all those defensive thoughts, all of those judgmental thoughts, all of those resentful thoughts that come up and emotions that come up, and practicing this. I could see peace instead of this. It's not what it seems. I'm not upset for the reason I think. Peace is in my mind, but I've run away from it again. And that's coming from fear. And I don't have to condemn myself, but I have to look at it. And so feel what you're feeling, but at least name it. It's a choice that I'm making. And just taking responsibility for that. We don't really have to meditate to find our judgments, as if we're really paying attention and practicing this all the time. They're very close to the surface. We become very aware of them. And that's the way that the course gets us to bring the ego out of concealment. We're not denying that what we're doing anymore. And so we're forced to confront it more. And that's where healing happens, you know. So
Yeah, and then that confrontation is a gentle one. It's I think the way the Holy Spirit works and is evident throughout the way the course is architected is that it juxtaposes the insanity of the ego literally on every page with
right.
the sanity of the Holy Spirit. And
Hmm.
we see this sharp contrast between the two. And over time, even though we tend to muddy the waters initially, I think the more we look at our mind objectively and dispassionately and gently and patiently, we begin to see that all of the crazy thoughts that don't bring us peace are attributable to the ego. And
Yeah.
everything that really does bring us peace is something where we drop the ego's erroneous counsel and listen to Holy Spirit instead, and realize, oh, there really is a peaceful place that I could look from that watches the ego without needing to launch a nuclear attack to shut it down, but just watches it and says, okay, there's another peaceful place here in the mind that doesn't have to be self-condemning. And this last week, I sometimes work with little memes throughout the week, and one that came up for me this week is going from the specific to the Pacific. And I was thinking about that, not the Pacific Ocean, but Pacific in terms of an adjective of meaning peaceful. And
Hmm.
and it just seems like this actually really fits um, lesson 34 beautifully. I could see the Pacific instead of the specific.
Hmm.
I could see the peace instead of this particular issue that I've made a big deal out of by listening to ego's propaganda machine and taking its its misinformation seriously.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's really just that, again, we're really just asked to look at it. The course
Mhm,
is very gentle in that way. We're not asked to give it up. We're not
mhm,
asked to stop it, or try to
mhm,
fight with it.
mhm.
In fact, that's counterproductive. We're
Yeah.
just asked to see what we're doing.
Mhm,
Oh, there's a part of me that's really, really invested in the story of this personal self and the defense of this personal self. And that's what I'm choosing right now. It has nothing to do, anything that crossed my path once I've made that decision would be the problem. And I mean, why did we decide to have a dream that we're in relationship with so many other forces and bodies and problems? I mean, that we could have just had a dream where we were, in a very peaceful space and had no problems in a body that functioned perfectly. But that's not what we chose. That's not the dream that we're dreaming.
mhm,
And so, there's a method to our madness, as Ken was always quoting Shakespeare. But yeah, it's a choice that we're unconsciously making, although it's not completely, the whole course is trying to get us to have that little flicker of awareness that's still there. We couldn't bury it completely in our mind. And
mhm,
it's really gently raising it to awareness more, as we practice this, it becomes it's, we're very aware of it. I mean, that's one of the very uncomfortable parts of this journey, is that you become very in touch with your unkind thoughts. And that is a necessary step,
mhm.
sorry to say.
Yeah,
We're not going to give it up until we kind of become horrified about it.
right. Yeah.
And so we don't have to, we do, the more we practice, the more forgiving of ourselves we should become of it, and more used to it we are. And so we don't have to, Jesus is never judging us. The course, the Holy Spirit is never judging us. But and so we don't need to judge ourselves, but we do need to see the hateful nature of it, and that a part of us has made, believes that that's the only way that we can be saved from the guilt that we made real in our mind, and is committed to trying to protect that and defend it. And the way that we do that, the way that the strategy that the ego, the part of our mind that wanted to proceed with this experiment and believe that it was real, the strategy that is used in that process is to blame it on someone else. And so we need these situations and people in our lives, special relationships that always seem to be a problem for us, and we write dreams, we script dreams, we choose dreams that in which they're, the scenes and the problems and the relationships are very convincing in being a problem. They're very problematic within the dream.
Mhm.
And we all have our villains in the dream, but everybody has their that every fragment of the decision making mind that's dreaming has their own villains.
Mhm.
And I'm probably one of theirs. So I mean,
We're all probably in multiple
yeah.
dreams as villains,
Yeah, exactly.
multiple
I
times per
mean,
day.
all
Yeah.
of us are playing roles for other people too, and I mean, that's not, we don't concern ourselves with that. We concern ourselves with the healing of my own mind, because that's really all it takes, is
Yeah.
because all minds are healed in that awareness, by withdrawing my projections. But I have to see that I'm doing this before I begin to realize how much it's hurting me and that I don't want it anymore.
Mhm.
So.
As you were sharing that, I was kind of picturing that classic image that I know Ken Wapnick has used many times in different ways, is that, being in the theater with Jesus and
Mhm.
watching the movie of our life. And I was thinking, well, as we've scripted it as egos, it's a horror film, but we don't want to see
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And so rather than look at the movie as an observer, and see the horror, we'd rather be on the screen, identified with the dream figure rather than the dreamer.
Mhm.
So because being a dream figure gives us an excuse, because then we go, oh, that this person to the left or the right or whatever, wherever
So
is
being the hero of the dream, right?
exactly. I can be the hero. I can be the
Star of the dream.
relatively innocent one, because there's not enough innocence
Yeah,
to go around. So I can, point the fingers at all these others that are the culprits
right.
of my horror film. and or my woeful saga, and Jesus says, hold my hand, and we can watch this horror film together, and pass the popcorn too a few times maybe,
Right.
but just kind of watch with a gentle, dispassionate patience that sees that nothing happened in truth,
Yep.
even though we've made big deals out of so many little snippets of film that flip past the screen of our mind that are
Yep.
really inconsequential in eternity. And but we're so zoomed in both in terms of time and space to our own little stories that we kind of forget about that most of the time. And
Yep.
Jesus asks us to kind of step back and get a cosmic view of things and see that, and an objective view that's not distorted, to see that in truth nothing happened, even though within the dream all kinds of crazy stuff is happening, but
Yep.
from the theater, um, we can see it without putting our personal bias into it, if we're just a spectator rather than a participant.
Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah.
true. Yep.
Should I read the third one?
Yeah.
Okay. Some 5 minutes of mind searching are required for each of the longer practice periods. Search your mind for fear thoughts, anxiety provoking situations, quote, offending, unquote, personalities or events, or anything else about which you are harboring unloving thoughts. Note them all casually, repeating the idea for today as slowly as you watch them arise in your mind, and let each one go to be replaced by the next. Well, how many people can honestly say that they don't have a bunch of those every day,
Right. And again, I don't think that we need to search our mind. I mean, that this is for people, this is a workbook lesson. So it's really geared at the first time through it.
Mhm.
And although I think, it's very valuable to return to it again and again, because just like with the text, you have a deepening understanding of this all, because it, as you practice it and try to live it, it becomes much more meaningful. But for those of us that have been on this path for a little while, we become the practice itself makes you very aware of this. You don't need to search. I don't need to search my mind. That's the last thing I want to do in a meditation. My mind is like filled with these things all the time.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of them, and so you really are practicing all the time, and that's really, that's helpful. You do, and there are times when, more and more when you have peaceful responses, because that's the benefit of this practice. You are learning to choose peace more often. But we should not be alarmed that we're still choosing against it, because again, there's, until all the guilt is dissolved through this process and practice, we're going to do that. It's what we, what we do when we choose the ego, when we choose to defend the personal self and what's not true, and it needs a lot of defense
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
keep it
What
going.
what you just said reminded me of something that Jeff Siebert said in one of his online classes. I think it's been a few years ago now. That kind of stuck with me. That is like the ego never diminishes in its
No,
insanity,
no,
and nor should we expect, unrealistically, for the ego to sort of taper off and suddenly, most of our day is peaceful and there's nothing that pushes our buttons. No, it's going to be 100% insane all the way through.
yep,
But the time that we spend identifying and believing the ego's story can go like this, whereas the amount of time that we spend listening to Holy Spirit and its counsel can ramp up in the other direction. And I mean, it's not a linear thing or anything like that, but I mean, just overall, it seems like the more we go from a little willingness, like the Course's bait and switch
hmm
strategy at the beginning says, which is, like the early workbook lessons, yeah, a few minutes here and there, to abundant willingness, meaning, this, the Course doesn't really talk much about meditation, because I think it aims at making our entire waking, our entire experience a waking experience where we are more lucid, gently aware, not in any kind of a harsh, gritty, clench our fist, grit our teeth vigilance, but just a gentle, relaxed um, awareness that notices which thought systems in effect by how we feel. And
hmm
if I can just practice that more and more and just see, a greater and greater percentage of each day when I'm crazy and following ego's
Right.
misinterpretations of everything, and therefore not at peace. I will want to be more mindful, and I will be motivated to look, not to escape the world physically, but to escape the ego's thought system mentally, and still be in the world, but not identified with the ego's interpretation of it.
And I mean, I think that what you were saying about what Jeff was saying, that the ego is just kind of 100% hate and all the time, and defensive all the time, and
Right.
on the lookout all the time, and kind of never shuts up. But there is, I think, in practice, there's, we are learning to allow all the hatefulness that comes up, all of our emotional reactions that come up. We're still going to feel those, and it's unrealistic to think that you're not going to feel those. But we can consistently be calling ourselves gently on it and just saying, oh, that's coming from fear. There it is again. That's, that is, I could see peace instead of this. That's that, and I'm not, because I'm choosing fear. And it's okay. I can forgive myself for that. And it's not, we don't have to do anything about it. So, I think that our practice changes over time, and into being able to consistently do that pretty much all the time, not have the answer very far away at all. That even when we're having huge ego attacks, there's a little part of us that knows that this is not going to do any good, that it's just much ado about nothing, and that it's not really why I'm upset,
Mhm.
and that why I'm upset is not really a problem. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about an example today when I was sent out to a grocery errand, and my wife and I have this little app on our phone where we can add things to the list, and I
Hmm.
thought, oh, I'm almost done, and then see another thing pop up, another thing, another. No, could you change it to this? And I was starting to get impatient. I realized, well, no, I set this up. I.
Right,
but
right,
but the circumstances are such that if we can just notice that's like, well, I set this up, and I could see peace instead of my usual reaction to thinking, well, I have other things I'd rather be doing. But then if space and time are in my mind, then what better project could I be doing than looking at my mind through the lens of forgiveness?
right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, that, in one of the interviews that I did with Ken that's on my website, the name of it is, make it the most important thing. And he was making the point a lot in that interview that, we have to, it's not that we give up anything that we're doing in the world, but we make the overriding purpose of forgiveness the most important thing, not how everything that we're doing is turning out in form, or whether it's meeting our expectations or we're getting somewhere with it, but that it is a classroom, and that is the most important thing that I'm trying to learn here. And so even if my day has been a failure in the world's terms, if I've used it as a, to take another step toward healing my mind and letting go of guilt, then it's been a huge success. I
Yeah.
get an E plus. So I think that's a great way of looking at what we're doing, because it's inevitable that we all fail in the world. That too is a setup that we can't ever, and we put such pressure on ourselves, um, to achieve and to prove ourselves and all of it. Try to get people to, to get whatever it is we're trying to get as a personal self, and all of which never really solves the problem. So.
Even on the level of form, we hold ourselves to these impossible standards, and
Impossible standards,
and
and are
and
very hard on
and
ourselves.
yeah, we're our own worst
Right.
critic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then if we're not, we have plenty that will step in and help us to.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah.
But that's really just our own call for love and support.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So we're at paragraph 4. If you
Uh-huh.
begin to experience difficulty with this mind searching that he's talking about, which, you know, is very elementary step, but In thinking of specific subjects, continue to repeat the idea to yourself in an unhurried manner without applying it to anything in particular. Be sure, however, not to make any specific exclusions. And the workbook is always pointing that out, that, ultimately we're being led through a process of healing that shows us, of looking at our lives, that begins to reveal that there's no real order of difficulty in miracles or hierarchy of illusions, that all of this is equally destructive
Mhm.
to our mental health,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that all of it is an outside picture of the inner choice for believing that we're guilty over a separation from love that never really happened. And
That's the archetypal specific
yeah,
exclusion, the
yep,
separation of a specific self, an
yep,
exclusion from perfect oneness.
right.
And we
So
think we pulled
anything
it
that
off.
isn't kind and peaceful is 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 a choice for the ego, is a choice for guilt and hatred. From the course's perspective, there's not, there aren't degrees of this. There's no minor twinge of annoyance, as the course says. So, and that's okay. That we want to try to the best of our ability to apply it to everything and everyone. And if there are exclusions that come up, which inevitably there will be, then that's something we want to look at too. That's my unwillingness. That's a part of me that I've invested a lot of guilt and fear in. Again, it's that outside picture of an inner condition, and it may take me longer to work with this, but my goal of healing still must embrace this, when I'm ready. So this too must go. And that's okay. We'll be led through that process if we keep practicing. So
Yeah, I think another point that I find helpful is that we don't have to forgive, the entire cosmos as we perceive it. We just have to keep forgiving and generalizing that practice to include everyone and everything eventually, even though
right.
in the first preliminary faltering steps we take is we typically will choose, something that's seemingly less consequential. Maybe it's um, a, a checker at a grocery store or someone that cuts us off in traffic or something, and we realize, oh well, gee, no real harm came of that, and then we start applying it to more and more situations, including the more systemic things of people that we've lived with for years or worked with for years, or family members, or things that are they're seemingly more entrenched, but yet ultimately we see there's all the same, that there's no order of difficulty.
And that process of generalizing, it happens of itself. We don't
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
we don't have to do that. It's not something we consciously do.
right.
The course is just asking us to, whatever comes up, whatever's upsetting you, whatever's in your face, practice with that.
Hmm. Hmm.
If it's the checker, then practice with that. If it's something that seems catastrophic that comes up in your life, practice with that. Just practice, practice, practice. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's almost like we're so zoomed in, we're just looking at a few pixels on the screen and we don't get the big picture. And then as we listen to Holy Spirit's counsel more and more, we realize, well, I could apply forgiveness to this too. I could see peace instead of this, yet another specific thing.
All of it is just forgiving ourselves for that choice. So,
Exactly.
we're not really forgiving that too is an illusion, but it's
Right.
it's the
Right.
earthly form of love. It's
Yeah.
the kind illusion,
Yeah.
um, the
Yeah.
healing illusion. So
Exactly.
yeah.
And more and more pixels kind of start to develop a picture, and realize, well, then maybe there's a bigger picture here, that metaphorically, of course, that's because it's not a visual thing or an image, but the idea that we start to get the big picture, so to speak, that really I could apply this to everything at some point. Yeah.
I
Let's
think we're
see.
on paragraph 5.
Five.
So
Okay.
yeah,
The shorter applications are to be frequent, made whenever you feel your peace of mind is threatened in any way.
there you go.
Not in a very narrow subset
Right.
of ways, right? Anyway, okay. The purpose is to protect yourself from temptation throughout the day. If a specific form of temptation arises in your awareness, the exercise should take this form. I could see peace in this situation instead of what I now see in it. Well, this situation, that's pretty general.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
what this, yeah, exactly. So, but he's saying that if there's a specific form of temptation, I could see it in this situation. So,
Hmm.
we are asked to apply it specifically to our dream, to whatever the problem is. Not to, we don't have to sit there and try to think, oh, what else is bothering me. It's just, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Just what's coming up for you is what we deal with, right?
Hmm.
So, and that
Anything less than perfect peace could be a suitable subject.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Which I think covers a fair amount of ground for most of
Oh
us, if we're
yeah,
honest. Yeah.
it does, it does.
Yeah.
All right, I think I will finish this up. Um, And the paragraph 6 says that if the inroads on your peace of mind take the form of more generalized adverse emotions, such as depression, anxiety, or worry, use the idea in its original form. So, you wake up one morning and, like you had a great day the day before and you felt peaceful and you had some nice shifts and all of that, in the way you were looking at in a relationship and interacting, and you wake up, with an ego backlash, right? You're sick, or you're, really depressed, or you're anxious and, dreading something, or you're really judgmental and whatever. So if those kinds of things come up, use the idea in its original form. If you find you need more than one application of today's idea to help you change your mind in any specific context, try to take several minutes and devote them to repeating the idea until you feel some sense of relief. And the original idea is, I could see peace instead of this. I could be peaceful instead of about my anxiety. I could be peaceful about my defensiveness, right? So
Or I could be peaceful about someone I'm concerned about.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
So if you find you need more than one application of today's idea to help you change your mind in any specific context, try to take several minutes and devote them to repeating the idea until you feel some sense of relief. It will help you if you tell yourself specifically, I can replace my feelings of depression, anxiety, or worry, or whatever the thought or situation or personality or event is, with peace. And again, this is an introduction to what we should be using all the time in our practice. That I could see peace instead of this whenever anything, as you were saying, that is not peaceful, when I'm not feeling peaceful, is a suitable form for the practice, and which means I should be practicing pretty much all the time, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
This last paragraph reminds me of um, an exercise that I did back in the, I think, early 70s, actually, before the course was written. As I was starting to study metaphysical books and ideas, and this phrase came to me that I thought, well, this is a pretty good phrase. Is I am choosing to feel this way, and so I
Mhm.
took a big sheet of computer paper about 6, 7 feet long, and I wrote in big black block letters, I am choosing to feel this way. I think I might have told this story before, but I find it helpful. And even though I don't have that near my ceiling anymore, I kind of still point to it as if it was still there, kind of in my mind. And I remember when I first started looking at that, on days that seemed to be going the way that I thought they should be going, I'd smile and say, yes, I'm choosing to feel this way. And, which kind of more fleeting than consistent when I think about it. But when I discovered when it really started having, getting some traction and having some impact was when things weren't going the way I thought they should be going. And I'd look up at that and say, damn it, that's still true. And that's when it really started to be helpful. It's like, I am choosing to feel this way.
Yeah.
And I could see peace instead of this, basically.
Right.
Seemed like
Yeah.
they're kind of companion ideas. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's one of the hardest, Ken always said um, that the realization that I'm choosing to feel this way, that especially with suffering,
Mhm.
is, you know, that's a horrifying thought at first. It's hard
Yeah.
to swallow, but more and more again, we don't have to swallow it. We just have to practice it. The workbook begins with that introduction saying that you don't have to believe all of these. Some of these ideas you'll find very startling, and you won't believe them, and you're not asked to. You're just asked to practice, and that's I think that's wonderful advice We don't have to believe it. We don't have to analyze it. We don't have to, but give it a try, practice it, and see. It's going to lead you to different experiences of a peace that is not dependent on this world. And, that's why we came to a spiritual path to begin with. So,
And this lesson really does remind us that we are the decision maker. We're not
that's
the
right.
ego mind, and we're not the projection
Yeah,
of the ego mind, and that neither of those are the problem. It's
that's right.
really the choice in our mind for the ego that is the
It's
problem.
hurting us.
And ultimately, we can and will, and from the course's metaphysical perspective, already have
Right.
have accepted that as our real
Resonate.
identity. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Even though that doesn't seem to be the case most of the time, but just remembering that that's a happy inevitability that we will want to choose against the insanity and for the peace. That can be kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, even when the tunnel seems a little dark now and then.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Uh, well, thank you. I think
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, I always find these conversations helpful because it reminds me of what I
mm,
can be practicing more. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yep. So thanks for doing this.
Likewise, and you can find Susan's writings and musings and much more interviews with Ken Wapnick and other course teachers on forgivable.com, and I'll post this video there as well as acimblog.com. So
Great.
anyway, thanks
Thank
again, Susan, and look forward
thank
to the
you.
next
Have a great
conversation.
weekend.
You too.
Okay. Bye bye.
Alrighty, bye for now.